All right, somebody in this room has the clicker. Oh, all right. I was actually wrong. It was on the stand. All right. Hello and welcome to everyone here. We're continuing on in our series on the Psalms today. A big thank you to Jack Wilsey for kicking us off with Psalm 1 last week. If you missed that for some reason, I highly encourage you to go back to the podcast or to YouTube and make sure that you listen to that. It was just an awesome kickoff to this whole thing. And one of the things that Jack emphasized quite memorably is that these Psalms are poetry. And as poetry, we do a disservice to them if we, quote, tie them to a chair and beat them with bike chains, I think is what he said. So to honor Jack and try to avoid doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to at least read our psalm today, Psalm 29, all the way through, start to finish, so you can at least kind of get the feel for it, for how it works as a whole unit. Then after we've done that, then we are going to tie it to the chair and beat it with bike chains, okay? So if you can, please open up your Bibles to Psalm 29. It's going to be up on the screen. It's printed in your handout, or, maybe the best thing to do is just to sit back, shut your eyes, and listen to it, because, again, this is poetry. So here we go, Psalm 29. This is from the English Standard Version. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forests bare. And in his temple all cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. This is Psalm 29. Pretty rad, huh? I've been looking forward to teaching this now for several weeks, ever since we kind of set up this whole psalm series. But before we get into the details of all this, specifically before we try to wrap our minds around the ancient context for this and how the Israelites would have heard this in their culture, their worldview at the time, I want us to kind of just pause and think about how are we hearing this poem right now as Christians in the 21st century, people who live in this culture with our cultural worldview and assumptions. What about this poem in particular should be striking to us? What assumptions are revealed in this poem that may in fact be a challenge to some of our cultural assumptions, or maybe to our own worldview? That's what I want us to think about here. And specifically, I'm going to do this I'm going to read some observations from a theologian named Michael Reeves. He's a British guy. Some of you may have read his book a few years ago, Delighting in the Trinity. I know we got a bunch of copies of it and handed out here. Well, he's got a new book that I got for my birthday last year, thanks to my brother-in-law, Craig. It's called, here it is. There's the picture of it. It's called Rejoice and Tremble, the Surprising Good News of the Fear of the Lord. And so far, I'm like halfway done with it. 4.5 out of 5 stars is what I give it, at this point. It only loses half a star because there's not very many pictures. So if you like books that are just all text, good, you'll like this one. In the first chapter of this book, Reeves makes this claim, and it kind of forms the basis for his theological arguments which follow, that in many ways, and somewhat surprisingly, our 21st century Western culture, and again, he's writing from the UK, but he's looking at Western culture, largely speaking, including the United States, is a culture of fear. Here's how he makes that case, and you can go ahead and you can see if you agree with his assessment based on what you've seen in the world around you. These days, he says, meaning now, since, again, this book was just published in the spring of 2021, so he's writing this, he actually wrote a lot of it during the pandemic and then beyond. These days, it seems, everyone is talking about a culture of fear. From Twitter to television, we fret about global terrorism, extreme weather, pandemics, and political turmoil. In political campaigns and elections, we routinely see fear rhetoric used by politicians on both sides of the aisle who recognize that fear drives voting patterns. And, he continues, in our digitalized world, the speed at which information and news are disseminated means that we're flooded with more causes of worry than ever. Fears that once we would have never been shared cross the world in seconds and are globally pooled. So we hear about this scary thing happening way over there, and this scary thing happening way over there, and this scary thing happening way over there, and we're bombarded with this stuff. Our private daily routines are filled with still more sources of anxiety. Take our diet, for example. If you choose the full-fat version on the menu, you're headed for a heart attack. Yet we're regularly confronted by the latest discovery that the low-calorie alternative is actually carcinogenic or harmful in some other way. And so a low-grade fear starts with breakfast. Or think of the paranoia surrounding parenting today, the valid but usually overblown fear of the kidnapper lurking online or outside every school has helped fuel the rise of helicopter parenting, and children are more and more fenced in to keep them safe. Small surprise then that universities are now expected to provide previously unheard of safe spaces to protect or quarantine students. However, and I appreciate that he said this because we get a lot of flack from some of you white-haired folk out there, it is wrong to single out the pejoratively named Generation Snowflake because as a whole, across the spectrum, we are an increasingly anxious and uncertain culture. Anyone in management knows about the staggering proliferation of bureaucratic red tape around health and safety. Yet it has not made us feel any safer. If anything, we triple-check our locks even more obsessively. The certain safety we all long for evades us, leaving us feeling vulnerable, like victims at the slim mercy of everyone or everything else. And therein, he's kind of getting to the crux of this here, is an extraordinary paradox because we live more safely than ever before. From seat belts and airbags in our cars. Some of you remember the day, Jerry Vorpal, you probably grew up just your parents would throw you in the back seat with a blanket over you and say, have fun in the car, To the removal of lead paint and asbestos from our homes. Not our house, by the way. We've got asbestos all over. Every night I go to bed, I think I'm in this asbestos coffin that I'm sleeping in. Our safety is guarded more than our shorter-lived ancestors could have ever imagined. We have antibiotics to protect us from infections that in other centuries would have been fatal. But rather than rejoicing, we worry that we're becoming immune and so heading into a post-antibiotic health apocalypse. Though we are more prosperous and secure, though we have more safety than any culture in history, safety has become the holy grail of our culture, and like the holy grail, it is something we can never quite reach. Now he shares a quote from a secular humanist researcher who says, Professor Frank Fioretti, not Frank Peretti, Frank Fioretti writes, why Americans fear more when they have less to fear than in other moments in the past is a question that puzzles numerous scholars. Why Americans fear more when they have less to fear than other moments in the past, that baffles people. Then Reeves, as a Christian, here is where he offers his diagnosis of what's happening in our culture. And he claims that the loss of this fear, that the root of this fear in our culture, the reason why we're so obsessed with safety but can never seem to find it, is actually the loss of a fear, which is the fear of God. As he puts it, our moral confusion today and our general state of heightened anxiety are both a fallout of the cultural loss of God as the proper object of human fear. And he continues, he explains this. He says, without a kind and fatherly God's providential care, meaning that there's a God who's taking care of things and things are unfolding according to his plan, we are left utterly uncertain about both the shifting sands of morality and reality. In ousting God from our culture, other concerns, from personal health to the health of the planet, have assumed a divine ultimacy in our minds. Good things, things like staying safe when you're in the car or your health, those are good things, have become cruel and pitiless idols, and thus we feel helplessly fragile. No longer anchored, society fills with free-floating anxieties. Free-floating anxieties. Whereas fear, this is how he explains that difference, whereas fear is a response to something specific like, holy cow, there's a tiger running at me or something. That's fear against that specific tiger. Anxiety is more of a general condition, like something in the atmosphere within a culture. Anxiety can therefore latch on to anything and everything effortlessly in a moment. One minute we are concerned about knife crime. The next minute, climate change. And here's how he kind of sums it up. When your culture is hedonistic, meaning, putting the pursuit of pleasure or what makes you happy above all else, and your religion therapeutic, which means it's all just kind of about making you feel good, whether or not what you're saying is true or not, and your goal a sense of personal well-being, fear will be the ever-present headache. So what do you think? Does this resonate with perhaps what you've observed in the news or in conversations with your friends and neighbors? Have you felt some of this fear in your own heart? Maybe when you're scrolling through social media in the morning, and maybe you find that there's kind of these untethered, free-floating anxieties attaching to this, and then to that, and then to this. And if so, what's the way out? For you as an individual, or for us as a church community, or us broadly speaking as a culture. It is in this context that I can hope we hear these words from Psalm 29. This opening paragraph right here, a summons, a command. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. And then this poem, it goes on to describe who God is and why he is worthy of this kind of adoration, this worship. So what my hope is today is that through this psalm, through our time together in God's word, we can catch just even a little glimpse of the great and glorious, and I will say the fearful grandeur of God. And that through that glimpse, each one of us here can walk out today with more fear of God and less fear of everything else. That is the hope. So let's do this. As you can see in your handout there, this is a poem that is in 3 stanzas, all right? The first 2 kind of mirror each other. They're the first 2 little 4-line stanzas there, each with actually the 4-fold repetition of God's name we see, right? Lord, 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 Lord. When you see the word Lord in all caps like that in the Psalms, it's actually the way of translating the sacred name of God, Yahweh, which of course wasn't pronounced by Jews. So in their translations, later translations, they would actually use just the term Lord, and we've carried that over to our English translation as well. But this is who this psalm is all about. It's cluing us into this. It's Yahweh, the personal name of Israel's creator God. And so it clues us in with all this repetition of the name, what the psalm says right here, that this psalm is about what? The glory due his name. Who God is. What he stands for. What this God has done for his people Israel. All of that is included in this concept of the personal name of God. And this psalm is about his glory. So what we're going to do as we work through this psalm, we're going to go through each of these stanzas in order, stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, and we're going to try to see the glory that is due God's name. So again, this first stanza, it's labeled in your notes as a call to worship. And that's really exactly what this is. So you got that fourfold repetition of the name Yahweh. You also have another fourfold repetition in there with verbs, ascribe, 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 and then worship. So it's kind of fourfold repetition with a twist there that catches your attention. And it kind of those are complementary to each other, because what does ascribe mean? It means to acknowledge or to attribute, to say this belongs to this person. You're saying greatness belongs to God. Glory, strength belongs to God. It kind of makes me think of, I don't know if any of you ever went to Mariners games back in the Kingdom, but I remember one time Bruce Stabbard actually took his son Stephen and me. We were around the same age, probably we were like 6 or 7 or something, because this was still back in the Kingdom. And when Randy Johnson walked out to the mound, everyone in our section stood up and they started going like this and bowing to Randy Johnson. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is so blasphemous. What are these people doing? And then I looked down the aisle and there's Bruce Stabbard. No, I'm just joking. I did not. I honestly cannot recall if Bruce was doing that or not. So you have to ask him. But I will say that right there, it gets a glimpse of what they're trying. They were ascribing greatness to Randy Johnson. They were trying to give him the glory due his name as the best lefty in the game, the best pitcher in the game, period, at the time. And that's the summon right here at the beginning, 3 times. Ascribe that kind of greatness to the Lord. Bow down. Worship him in the splendor of holiness. Now, what does that mean? Actually, a couple ways to take that. The first way, which means because of God's holiness and his greatness, worship the Lord because of the splendor of his holiness. But the other way to take it, which actually would be, I think, more the plainer way to take this, if this wasn't just in poetry, but it's worship the Lord in holy attire. So like the fine garments that the priests would wear in the temple to reflect the greatness and the glory of God. Worship God while dressed in a way befitting his honor. Now, personally, I actually think it's the first one, that to worship God because of his splendor and holiness, because of who this summons is directed toward, who are the, quote, heavenly beings, right? That's who this opening introduction is directed toward, not fellow worshipers, like if you were singing this in a Jewish community, but actually these heavenly beings. Literally, that term there is sons of the gods. So ascribe to the Lord, you sons of the gods, which is a weird, strange term. It actually only shows up one other place in the Bible, also in the Psalms, Psalm 89. Here's that. This gives us a clue to what's being talked about here. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord, to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. So clearly what's in view here are, as the ESV translates it, spiritual beings, specifically angels. These, we get visions of this like in Ezekiel and in Revelation and elsewhere, that God in his splendor is surrounded by these angels who praise him night and day. I think, again, Revelation 4, there's those 4 living creatures around the throne who, all day long, night and day, for all eternity, are singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. So that's really the picture being painted right here at the beginning of this poem, that this is the glory due God's name, because from him and to him and through him are all things. This is a great and holy God deserving of all worship. He is supreme. And that stanza 2 is where this really just begins to fly off the page. So here we go. We're moving on to the meat of this 3-stanza sandwich. Verse 3, where we see the Lord of the storm. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, the Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks or shatters is how some people put that, the cedars. The Lord shatters the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Sirion like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forests bare. And in his temple all cry, glory. Wow, can you kind of feel that or see that? Like, I wish if I had some sort of magical power and could bottle up a thunderstorm in a bottle and then just slowly uncrack the top and have that thing explode in here, that would be amazing, because that's exactly what's going on in this page right here. This is all a first-person account in poetry of someone who's like standing in Jerusalem by the temple. We see it at the end of this. That's kind of the perspective that this whole thing is told from, those in the temple watching this thing unfold, of a giant thunderhead that begins to form and take shape over the Mediterranean, off to the northwest there, and then blow in toward land and smash across this country north of Israel. That's the movement here, okay? So let's just kind of walk through this and see if we can kind of see it or picture it, the way the Israelites would, standing there. Verse 3, this is when the clouds, they're just starting to form and kind of swell over the sea. You're like, oh my goodness, that doesn't look like a normal cloud over there. That looks like maybe that's a thunderstorm. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. That's when you hear it. Those first rumblings of thunder. The God of glory thunders, the Lord over many waters. And verse 4 now is where things get intense. The thunder is getting a little bit louder. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. So you can hear this thing echoing down across the land, hitting you at Jerusalem. Verse 5 now, this is when the storm begins to move inland to Lebanon and crashes into these forests that are on the foothills. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. And that's a big thing to say if it's breaking the cedars of Lebanon, because these trees were famous for their size and their strength. You might remember accounts of Solomon building the temple. He buys a ton of these cedars because they're just like the biggest, strongest trees around. It'd be like me saying, that the voice of the Lord smashes the sequoias and wrecks the redwoods. It's so powerful right here in the wind and everything that's happening in the storm, smashing, breaking limbs. Verse 6, he makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Sirion like a young wild ox. This is almost comical here, because what's happening is the mountains themselves, as they're looking at this storm hitting them, it appears that the mountains themselves are shaking. These mountains that kind of dominate this northern horizon while you're looking from Jerusalem, from the perspective of those standing there in Judea, it looks like these mighty mountains are skipping and jumping right now. So strong is the thunder. They're like a young ox, or like a frisky farm animal at play, or like my 2-year-old daughter this morning, who was doing this little Hawaiian dance before breakfast in the living room. That's what these mightiest, biggest things in creation right there around them are acting like little babies right now, and are reduced to that status by the powerful voice of the Lord. And then come the pyrotechnics in verse 11. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. These are lightning bolts, right? Very strong, important symbol of deity in the ancient Near East. And they're saying, these don't belong to any of those idols you think cast the thunderbolts. This is God who is in charge of the thunderbolts. Then verse 8, the voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. So the storm is moving further inland now, past the mountains, the wilderness of Kadesh, almost out of sight for the observers, but not at all losing steam, shaking even the desert floor in all of its fury now. And then verse 9, the voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth, strips the forest bare. I'll tell you what, that's kind of a weird one there, because all of a sudden you're like, what? Is making the deer give birth? I thought we're talking about a thunderstorm, and this kind of comes out of nowhere. There's some translation issues going on. It could be that really this is that makes the deer give birth, which would mean like this storm is so loud and powerful that like it sends the deer into premature labor because they're scared. But it's also possible, and several other translations, take it this way, that This is a reference to God, again, bending the oaks, which is another way, depending on how you read the Hebrew vowels here. Hebrew's weird. It didn't, the vowels were not written in the original text of the Bible. They were, assumed. And so depending on how the vowels were right here, it could either be the deer or the oaks. And either way, what the spotlight is on right here is the shocking aftermath of this huge and terrible storm. There's, either deer going into premature labor, or there's twisted oaks lying all over the ground that have been stripped bare, and it just looks like, the wreckage. If you've seen where Mount St. Helens is just, toppled whole forests, that's kind of the idea right here. So then what do all the observers do when they've seen this storm form, come inland, move through? They're thinking about the wreckage in its wake. Last line of the stanza, and all in his temple cry, glory. They're just overcome. Glory. It's like it's written as an exclamation in the Hebrew, so it's almost just like, wow. Just no other sentence, just glory. That's what they say, because they're so overwhelmed and overcome, which leads then to this final assessment, the conclusion of the poem, the God on the throne. Stanza 3. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Notice again here that fourfold repetition, right? The Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. This poem is all about him. He's utterly supreme. He is the king. That's the image right here, conclusively. This poem is all about him. That's why we have this image of just total regality, royalty, with him enthroned over the flood. Interesting that, again, this word flood right here in this psalm is the only place this is used in the Bible other than back in Genesis, with talking about the flood of Noah. It's there and it's here. So I think clearly this is a literary callback to that event. It's thinking about God's role in his greatest act of judgment, flooding the whole earth with water, right? It's a reminder that, this God who does that, he is the God without equal, and he sits enthroned over these waters, over that flood, over even now this flood that comes with this rainstorm forever and ever and ever. And notice that he's sitting here. He's not standing, like a king in vigilance, walking on the ramparts of his fortress or whatever. No, he's sitting. He's sitting as the conquering, ruling king. And this then is why you have the plea at the end. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace, because he alone is, if there's any hope of peace, if there's any hope of strength, he alone is going to be the source of those qualities. He alone has the power to give these good things to his people. Now, clearly, a claim like that has some major implications for worldview and how you see things, how you live your life, both for us right now, but also for these Israelites living back then. Because remember, we talked about this in our introduction to the whole series, is that these Psalms, they weren't just, worship songs that they just sang, or campfire poems that they taught to their kids and then, would read to each other. These Psalms were also written for our instruction, for the formation and the shaping of the worldview of the people of God, how they ought to think, how they ought to imagine things and see the world in a way that's consistent with who God is and what he has revealed to his people in his word. And oftentimes, this is in direct opposition to the assumptions of their culture. And this is such a clear thing right here. And you got to remember, the Israelites were not immune to cultural influences by any means, right? Sometimes we can think of them that way. They had such a distinctive lifestyle and they were kind of cloistered in the land of Israel and all was well. No, there was a lot of coming and goings and trade and neighbors and battles and territories being conquered and then taken back, and a lot of back and forth throughout this time. And if you read the Old Testament, you see that all the time, in fact, the Israelites were falling prey to the lies of the world around them. All the time they're going and they're worshiping idols. You see this happen throughout the Old Testament. All the time they're thinking that they need to go to this idol or that idol to get what they need, to get strength and peace, rather than to God. And these Psalms were a defense against that. Psalm 29, this is just such a great example of how this works on a worldview level. On the back of your handout, I've got 3 of these assumptions. We're going to go through them right now, just 3 essential worldview assertions that are in this psalm right here, embedded in it very clearly, demonstrated powerfully and pointedly, that are 3 truths about who God is and how the world works that are in just direct opposition to the prevailing beliefs of the people around the Israelites, and a way to form the hearts of the Israelites to know God's truth and take hold of that rather than fall victim to these other lies. So here they are. Assertion number 1, the weather is ruled by God alone. The weather's ruled by God alone. We see this clearly in the psalm about the thunderstorm, right? It's God who's in charge of all this. He's the one who is making this storm happen start to finish because he is in control of the weather. And this assertion might not seem like a big deal to us. We're kind of like, okay, whatever. Well, this was a big deal in their time because most people around the Israelites in the ancient Near East, Mesopotamian region at this time, believed that a god named Baal controlled the weather. Baal, also called Baal, if you want to do kind of the cool. If you're hanging out with like a lot of seminarians and you're sitting around smoking your bubble pipes, you call him Baal. If you're with normal people, you call him Baal. So we're going to go with Baal here. But Baal is a Canaanite storm god. This is who he was. He was a weather god. He was who most of the Canaanite people at the time believed that he was the one who was responsible for sending the rain that would water their crops. And I mean, they're an agrarian culture, so this is such a big deal to them. Their lives depended on whether or not their wheat grew or whether or not the grass was green to feed their cows. If the rain didn't fall, they died. If the rain didn't fall, they had to watch their children die and starve. Can you imagine what's that like when you're anxiously looking up at the sky and you're thinking, when is this rain going to come? What am I going to do? My children are starving. My babies need to nurse. What am I going to do? So sometimes the Israelites, in their desperation, in their fear, they would go to the altar of Baal. Not necessarily, and you can see this in the Psalms, it wasn't, throughout the Old Testament, it wasn't necessarily that they were going to reject God and go to Baal. They wanted to worship Baal and God, just in case, kind of to hedge their bets, in case Baal really did have some sway over the weather, in case he really did have some power to give us the rain this fall. Then they would also go to the altar of Baal. This is one of the reasons we have Psalm 29 in our Bible, is just to show the foolishness of that, to show the foolishness of that kind of way of thinking within the worldview of their culture. Because Baal is not the god of the storm. Yahweh is. Baal is not the one who forms those clouds over the water. Yahweh is. Baal is not the one who breaks the cedars and casts down the lightning bolts and shakes the mountains and all that. It's all because of Yahweh, the Lord, because Yahweh alone is Lord of the storm. This is actually why I'm going to throw this. I know the writing's small there. I just mainly want you to see what is highlighted there. It's that the name Yahweh is repeated 18 times in the 11 verses of this psalm to bring this point home like a hammer that is pounding on nails. Yahweh, 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 not Baal. This structure right here, it's distinctive and it's intentional, according to scholars. Because this repetition, where you repeat the name of the god over and over and over, this is exactly what you find in Canaanite poetry from this period. This psalm is mimicking that form, and it is correcting its theology intentionally, polemically. In fact, this whole psalm, like if you just were to read it to a bunch of Israelites back then, out of context, maybe just took out the name Yahweh, they would think that you are reading Canaanite poetry. That's how this would sound to the ear. The rhythm, the cadence, it's distinctive. It would sound to them just as distinctively Canaanite as if like you were to hear, like polka music instead of hip hop. You would know, no, that's this form of music with this cultural context, this root. That's that form of music with this cultural context, this roots. And it would be distinctive to you. Same as them right here. When the Israelites would hear this psalm or chant this psalm, what they would know they are doing is they are chanting biblical truth in a Canaanite form that flies directly in the face of pagan belief. Yahweh is the Lord of the storm, not Baal, and he is using Baal's own poetry to prove it. Second major worldview assertion that we see in this psalm, it's kind of related to this first one, is that the water is ruled by God alone. Again, this one might not seem like that big of a deal to us, but this was a big deal to the ancient people. And that's because in ancient thought, water represented this kind of uncontrollable force. The forces of chaos. That's what it symbolized in much of their literature and stories from this time. I mean, think back even to Genesis, to the story of creation. Before God speaks light into existence, the earth is formless and void, we read, and the Spirit of God hovered over the what? The waters, right? Or in the book of Job, where we see this great and terrible sea creature, Leviathan. Where does he live? In the waters. Go forward to the book of Revelation, where the beast rises up to make war on God's people. Where does the beast come out of? The sea. So this is kind of a theme throughout the Bible. Water can be used symbolically in this way. Yet throughout the Old Testament, and very clearly right here in this poem, God is shown to be ruler over the waters. The voice of the Lord thunders, right? Over what? The waters. Many waters. Not below the waters, not beside the waters, not in the waters, not against the waters. He's over the waters. And then where does God sit at the very end in victory as a conquering king? The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. This is who our God is. This psalm is declaring to all these ancient people. He's the God over the waters. He's the emperor over the sea, maybe as, C.S. Lewis would put it. The God who doesn't struggle against these forces of chaos and hope that somehow he can overpower them or strive against this tumultuous flood. No, he's the God who sits serene above it all, telling the water what to do with the word of his mouth, because God created the waters with the word of his mouth. That's the third worldview assertion in this psalm. God alone has the voice to rule creation. Again, think back to that creation narrative in Genesis. How does God create the world? He speaks. And it comes into being. Let there be light, and there was light. Let the ground bring forth plants, and it did. Let the land produce living creatures, and it did. This is what we see. His voice is doing all the work. And this is why when the voice of God, thunders forth in this psalm right here, creation listens. The clouds go where God tells them to go. The winds smash what God tells them to smash. Over and over again. I mean, the voice of God, it's given the spotlight in this psalm. This is so cool to me, the way this jumps out. 7 times in this middle stanza alone, again, that term, the voice of God, the voice of the Lord, is repeated with that hammer-like repetition. The voice, the voice, the voice, the voice, the voice of God that rules over all of creation with a word. These 3 truths right here are vital cornerstone type beliefs within a Jewish worldview. That God alone rules over the weather, God alone rules over the water, God alone has the voice that when he speaks, creation listens and creation does what he says. So let me ask you, how then would a Jewish person who is steeped in this worldview, who has chanted and sung this psalm all of their life, read a story like this? On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they, that's the disciples, took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he, Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Who then is this? That is the question that I think brings us all together for us today as Christians reading the psalm. Who then is this? Who is this who rules over the weather? Who is this that rules over the waters? Who is this that speaks with a voice that the winds seem to recognize and the seas obey? Who then is this? You know, if we want to escape our culture of fear, this culture, where we're safer than ever, but more worried than ever before, this culture of free-floating anxiety that can latch on to anything and everything, then what we need to do is latch on to Jesus in faith, to see him for who he truly is, and to fear him for who he truly is. It's really the pattern we see in this story with the disciples, right? They're terrified in the middle of this, right? They get out to the middle. There's this storm. They think, we're all going to die. Teacher, we're perishing. That's what they say. We're all going to die. Don't you care? So that's fear speaking right there. That's dread, concern for their safety based on what they see as uncontrollable circumstances that they can't do a thing about. They've done all they can do about it. They're afraid, as Jesus puts it. Why are you so afraid? You're afraid of the waves. You're afraid of the storm. And then ironically, in what condition do the disciples find themselves in the end? After the sea is calm, after all the danger is past, and they're just kind of like bobbing there. And they were filled with great fear. You see that movement in this story? They go from being afraid to being filled with great fear. That is the arc for the disciples here. And what makes all of the difference for them and for us is where this fear is oriented, what it is latched onto. There is such deep and rich truth being unfolded in this story right here for us, in conjunction, especially, I think, with the worldview and the pictures of this psalm. And that truth is that the fear of God is the basis for any lasting peace. I'll say that again. The fear of God, properly understood, properly oriented in who God has revealed himself to be in his word, in the person of Jesus Christ, is the basis for any lasting peace. I mean, really, that's the note that this psalm ends on, right? You have this great and glorious, this terrifying, really, vision of God in this thunderstorm, and all the people say story, but then you got say glory, then the last line, may the Lord bless his people with peace. You might have thought it would say something like, may God please not just destroy us all with a snap of his fingers. May God please just not send us a thunderstorm like that's going to level my fields. No, may God bless his people with strength and peace, because this isn't just some terrible storm God they know. This is the God they know of the covenant. This is the personal God who's revealed himself as Yahweh. This is the God who has parted the Red Seas and given salvation to his people, the God who loves them. This is the God whom they fear. Peace, shalom, well-being. That's what is found in the fear of the Lord of the storm. And if we're going to escape this culture of fear and anxiety that has its grip on so many of us, then this is the fear that we must take hold of. But how? I mean, this is hard. I've been praying in my own life, thinking about this psalm, of just, God, help me fear you more for who you truly are. Not fear for, my misconception of you or whatever, but help me fear you for who you truly are. This is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So how do we cultivate this fear of God in our lives? This fear that kind of can restrain or set limits on all our other fears. I'm careful the way I'm saying that because I don't think the Bible gives us any hope of living just a completely fear-free life right now. You know, this is a fear that restrains our other fears. This is a fear that puts our fears in context. So how do we kind of get that? How do we, do we just read Psalm 29 a bunch of times? Do we memorize this? Do we go find out where there's a really big thunderstorm forecasted and we drive there so that we can just watch it like crash into the mountains and see, okay, now I've got it? Those are all good ideas. I tell you, you're free to give them a shot, but I don't actually think that any of those particular things will get you far enough. To truly fear the Lord, you must not only know his power and his greatness and his majesty, you also need to know his goodness. You must not know only his greatness, but his grace. You must see God not only as, the creator and the Lord who thunders over the waters, but as the Redeemer, the Lamb who dies in your place. And this is something that John Calvin makes a really big point of in his, massive tome, The Christian Institutes. And I'm grateful again to Michael Reeves for pointing this out in that book I was reading. Because what he observes is that the first book of Calvin's, 5-volume Christian Institutes focuses solely on the knowledge of God as creator. This would be kind of like what we see in Psalm 29, right? God's greatness, his power over storms and angels and people and everything else in all of creation. And this is a foundational, vital knowledge to have. This is why Calvin starts there, right? We need to know God for who he is in his glory and the dread that we can have of him. But that's not enough to have a full and robust fear of the Lord in the biblical sense. Again, it's enough to produce the dread of the Lord, certainly, to be scared of God and his greatness, but that would be similar, I would think, to kind of how, we read in James that even the demons believe and tremble. They don't fear the Lord. They believe and they tremble, but it's not a sufficient saving type of fear, the fear that restrains and can cast out our others. To have that kind of fear, according to Calvin, we need not only the knowledge of God as creator, we need the knowledge of God as Redeemer. The knowledge of God that we can only see in God's most profound act of self-revelation, the most powerful and personal way that he showed humanity who he is, and that's in the person of Jesus Christ. John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, so now we know the Word is a he, a person. And though the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, but his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, all who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his what? His glory. His glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. If we want to know what God is like, if we want to see him in a way that just makes us like those in the temple, fall on our faces and just say, wow, glory, glory. Look at Jesus. That's what John is saying here. Look at Jesus to see God's greatness and his glory. See the glory of this God who thunders over the waters as he climbs into a boat, crawls up into the stern, makes a pillow out of some rigging, and falls asleep. See the glory of this God who sits enthroned over the flood forever and ever as he takes a seat beside a dusty well at noon and asks a Samaritan woman to draw him a drink. See the glory of this God who makes the mountains shake and skip like farm animals as he walks through a crowd and says, "Who touched me?" And then speaks tenderly to an outcast woman whom no one had touched in 12 years and heals her. See the God of all creation who makes everyone in his temple cry glory and awe and fear, the Lord over the waters, as in the most astounding act of his glory, what John in his gospel makes so clear is the most glorious moment of Jesus' ministry, as this God of all creation hangs as a corpse, crowned with thorns, and when his side is pierced, blood and water flow out of it. This is where we see God's glory. This is where we ask ourselves, who then is this? And what I hope that we find as we continue to know the greatness of God and the goodness of God in the person of Jesus Christ is that this amazing grace that teaches our heart to fear will also be the means by which our fears are relieved. And I don't want to make this sound trite or easy, because it's not. It's just so easy to say, fear God and all your fears are going to go away. I know so many of you are dealing with very difficult things, with real trauma, real stuff that actually can seize you with anxiety or panic, sleepless nights where you're lying awake and you don't know how to get rid of these thoughts or the fear that is seizing you. So I don't want to make this just sound like a quick snap your fingers and this is it. This is a long and difficult road of learning to fear the Lord. But what we have a promise of in Scripture is that this Lord of the storm, this great God who thunders over the waters, in the person of Jesus Christ by the Spirit, is with you and for you all of the way. That's a promise. So let me just close now by praying these final words of the psalm, by praying these for you, the people of Fellowship Bible Church. You can bow your heads. May the Lord give strength to his people, those who belong to him by Jesus Christ, right here in this room. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord, that we know in Jesus Christ, our crucified, risen King who lives now to make intercession for us, may he himself, the Lord of the storm, the Lord of the cross, may he bless his people with peace. Amen.
Thank you for that message, Nate, and let's all just stand and